Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In light of Tuesday's election results, today we will be doing God-fearing makeup for our upcoming Christo-fascist autocracy. God has given us a gift in our new president, Donald J. Trump. I am here to show you how to appear in a both desirable but also sorry, I can't do this in a straight face. Holy and pure manner, so that your new husband, might find you absolutely appealing. If that's something that interests you, please stay tuned. Did you like my bit? It was a bit. I was being funny. This is not serious. Let me go off camera to fix my wig and then I will come back. Ooh, I'm back. I'm taking this wig off because I have not properly styled it, but I need y'all to know, you black female Trump supporters, this is what y'all look like. This is what y'all look like. Y'all look crazy. Insane. Azalea Banks. Putting on a wig that blends is not going to hide the ugliness in your soul, but it will at least make you easier to look at and easier to beat when the time comes. Jesus. I have replaced my ethnic head wrap, so you know that it's me again. I'm here to do my makeup and talk about the hot ass mess of an election that happened on Tuesday night and unfolded slowly on Wednesday morning, and discuss some ways forward as a people. I know all of us who have sense and love for our fellow man, and I mean that in the most straightforward and literal way. People who have sense and love for our fellow man are absolutely devastated by the outcome, and those who lead in life with hate, or at the very least, reactionary discontent. I don't want to come across as though I believe that everyone who is a supporter of the 45th and 47th president of the United States is a hateful bastard. I don't think that, but I do have a lot of knowledge that I think will help about how we got where we are and where we can go from here. While I'm doing that, I will not be doing God-fearing makeup because that's not my realm of expertise, but I will be doing fun, gorgeous makeup. So if that's something that interests you, and if you want to hear more about my thoughts about the 2024 election and some insight into my particular devastation, stay tuned. Please subscribe to my channel. This is a little corner of YouTube where I talk about literally whatever I want. And my name is Neida, if I haven't already said that. I'm all mixed up because I'm hungry and I'm sad. I am currently in the UK because I am getting a graduate degree in history, something a lot of y'all could use. I placed a reluctant yet enthusiastic vote for, which is likely an oxymoron, but I'll explain more later, vote for Kamala Marie Harris. I am one of those people who fear is an excellent motivator for me. Not a lot of people are like that, which is what the Democratic Party has failed to appreciate over the past 50 years. A longue durée, if you will. Let's be serious. Let's talk about it. In 2024, with a second Trump presidency on the horizon, the avowed statements of Republicans and Trump supporters that they want to dismantle democracy, things that they have said without necessarily saying in as many words on camera and on the record. And some of us are going, how did we get here? Some of us are going, where do we go from here? Some of us are going away. Just no longer participating in life. And all of these reactions are absolutely valid. As I said earlier, I'm over here across the pond getting an education in history. And as I am in the process of getting an education in history, it feels like it is my job. You could say I was called by God to give the information that I have as I receive it. And this semester, I have been taking a course called The History of Conservatism in the United States from 1930 to 1990. And there's a lot that I have learned in that class about how we got here, and a lot that I think we could all learn about where we can go from here. And so I'm going to do my makeup and explain that process, I guess. Maybe this will become a series on my channel where I talk about history, and that sounds fun. My friend Claire is here, by the way, visiting. She's sitting off in the corner, so when I turned, because I'm talking to Claire. But how did we get here? So honestly, we have to start at the beginning. Throughout the Gilded Age and up until the Great Depression, the concept of laissez-faire economics was actually incredibly popular in the United States of America. The idea that capitalism works best when the economy is left to do what the economy will do. There is no government intervention, or as little government intervention as humanly possible, and the market will correct itself. Every person is given the opportunity to rise or fall based off of their own merit, because that's what capitalism is all about, and that will naturally happen. It's a bit of the Darwinian evolutionary theory, the survival of the fittest. Those who are the most fit, those who deserve it the most, will get what they deserve in life, and those who don't deserve it won't. And then you have the Great Depression, which starts in 1929 and continues until about the onset of World War in 1941, I think is when the United States joined World War II. The Great Depression completely changed the calculus of American politics because people needed things. They needed the government to intervene or they would die. They needed the government to intervene or they wouldn't be able to feed their families. That level of need, I would argue, created a tolerance among the American people and among certain factions in American politics for government intervention that had not necessarily existed to that point. This is where we get Franklin Delano Roosevelt coming in. Now, Roosevelt was a Northern Democrat. Franklin Delano Roosevelt believed very much in the power of government to alter the status and lot of the people. He believed in benevolent democracy, benevolent governance, where the government intervenes when the people need it, and the function of government is to intervene when the people need it. That's a perfect type of belief system to have in a period of time when majority of people in the United States cannot take care of themselves. So I have my notes from class here, and I'm going to read some of them off so that you can kind of understand the context that we're existing in at this point. We have groups like the American Liberty League, which was established in the early 20th century as a way to combat Roosevelt's big government policies of intervening into the lives of the people. As the Great Depression goes on, as the Republican Party starts to realize how unpopular it is, this policy of laissez-faire economics and government non-intervention is, they start to assimilate some of the Democratic Party's policies, and they start to kind of see that they're not the world-ending catastrophes that they thought they were, or at least they can't act as though they are because they're so popular with the people. So groups like the American Liberty League, they're still in favor of financial relief for people who are unemployed, but they want to focus on business, farmers, and workers as the pillars of American society. So business owners are one of the great pillars. They bring economic freedom by creating jobs. Farmers are another pillar. They're very pro-agriculturalist in the Republican Party. And so are workers. Workers are necessary, of course, because they earn the money that is then spent and put back into the economy. This is a period of time in the 1950s where the Republican Party is trying to appease and assimilate to a dominant narrative. What they are lacking is their own sense of identity outside of what they oppose. They know they're against too much government spending. They know they're against too much government intervention. They know they're against bureaucracy, the growth of the federal government, executive overreach. There's a thing that happens in 1938 where Franklin Delano Roosevelt tries to stack the Supreme Court, and I think he's like trying to eliminate life long appointments because the Supreme Court that he inherited was not very pro his policies. And it's kind of a similar thing that we see with like the Biden Supreme Court reform and Biden's presidential office dealing with the Supreme Court that they've inherited. He's trying to impose Supreme Court reform, but at this time, it's very unpopular with the American people because the American people see the Supreme Court as a kind of lauded entity. And so when he introduces a Supreme Court reform in 1938, that sours some people on the Democratic message because they think that he's overreaching, they think he's doing too much, they think he's acting as a despotic executive. And so the country swings in the 1938 elections towards the Republicans. The Republicans gain a lot of seats in the House, they gain a lot of seats in the Senate, and they start to have a bit more of a voice, even though they still do not have control over the executive branch until the 50s. They would not have been able to gain these votes, though, if they had not started to assimilate some of the more left-leaning policies that Roosevelt instated while he was in office. And the Republicans are kind of rightly arguing, look, you're spending all this money. It's not really doing anything. He's spending all this money to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, and it's working a little bit, but it's not working enough. You don't really see the large-scale relief until the defense investment of the United States government ramps up at the beginning of World War II. I'm going to interrupt myself quickly to say that I am trying the new About Face Blush Brush look. You can say a lot about Halsey, but you can't say the makeup isn't good. I'm gonna link it down below. Oh, I love it so much. Oh yes, I was talking about how the Republican Party is defined mostly by what it opposes and not by what supports, what their actual policies are. So they know that they oppose things like I said, bureaucracy and federal employment, monopoly. They are a very industry over government type of group. So like wherever industry can make up for things, like it's the same way that we have private healthcare in the United States. They oppose fascism, Nazism, and communism, all things that they accuse Roosevelt of participating in. Executive branch expansion and overreach, and also what they call easy money policies. So any kind of welfare that is a way to give people money that they did not earn, or that they see them as not having earned because need is not a justification in the eyes of the Republican Party at this time, and honestly in most time. I'm mentioning the American Liberty League because the important thing about this group is that even though the Republican Party did not have a party platform that was based in its own values and its own ideology, it did have an understanding that taking the ideas to the people was an important thing. Starting at the grassroots was an important thing. So you see chapters of the American Liberty League springing up across the country as a way of people proliferating these Republican ideals of anti-big government, pro-industry, they would say they're pro-labor because they're pro-workers, like people having jobs and like earning their money as opposed to getting it from the government, and anti-fascism, Nazism, communism. You think about the buzzwords here. Who's not pro-liberty? American Liberty League. Great branding. Who's not anti-fascism, Nazism, and at this time, communism? Most people in the United States. So when you package it up that way and you bring it to the people, people will look at that and say, oh yeah, well, I agree with all of this stuff, and start to join. And this, I'm pretty sure, was one of the like dues paying associations that was bringing Republican Party ideas to the everyday person and indoctrinating them with them so that over time, these people would grow a Republican consciousness and they could kind of like expand from the base. Roosevelt, after he died in office, there was kind of a crisis in the Democratic Party, and it was split into different factions. So there were the moderates who were aligned with Truman, Roosevelt, I think his second or third vice president. There were the Dixiecrats, who were the Southern Democrats who still identified with the Democratic Party because it had become the party of like white ethnic laborers, but also it had always been the party of racist Southern white people. And then there were the super super progressives who were aligned with, I don't remember what this man's name was, but he was Roosevelt's second vice president, and he was highly progressive. He wanted to take the New Deal further than it had gone. He wanted to institute universal health care in the United States, a universal basic income, things that were at that time seen as like way too radical and associated with communism, but he was like super lefty. Today he would have been called an Antifa freak. Going into the 1950s, you start to see the pitch and tone of conservatism and the Republican Party change a lot. They're starting to acquire their own ideas about how the world should be run, as opposed to just responding to what the Democratic Party is throwing at them. And really the truth of the matter was that they were responding to what Roosevelt was throwing at them, because for a very long time, Roosevelt was the Democratic Party. You have people like Robert Taft, the son of former President William Howard Taft, who was called Mr. Republican because he was a senator. He was a senator from Ohio, and he was one of the early ideologues of the new Republican Party in the 20th century. So Taft is interested in things like economic liberty. He thinks economic liberty is America's birthright. It is the birthright of the American people. And economic liberty means that each man is able to go out and figure out their own destiny. Each man is able to define themselves and pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they can, and wallow in the dirt if they can't. He also believes in free enterprise, self-discipline, and morality. So oftentimes this was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant morality, because at this time people still hated Catholics. Harrison Butker would not have been very liked amongst the Republicans at this point in time. And then we also have individuality and liberty. An idea that little to no government intervention is what will bring America economic prosperity. That is accepting tariffs, because Trump, like one of the big things that Trump is talking about is like instituting a 25% tariff on Mexican imports until they get the border situation figured out. The idea is that tariffs protect American-made products. And so if we institute tariffs and keep foreign goods out of the country, if we institute tariffs and keep foreign goods out of the United States, then that means that there's more space for American-made products and American industry, and also more jobs for American people because they get to work in industry. You would say that it's kind of anomalous that this man is so obsessed with people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and having economic liberty, considering his background. Robert Taft, like I said, was the son of former President William Howard Taft. He himself ran for president several times, or was wanting to run for president several times, but he was never quite popular or charismatic enough to make it happen. He was a Yale legacy. He was the president of the Harvard Law Review when he went to law school. He got a job at the Supreme Court through his father's political connections. He was very much somebody who received his political opportunities through nepotism and used nepotism to his advantage, but he's preaching to the regular American man that all he needs to do is pull himself up by his bootstraps and get his life together. So this is also not someone who was ever poor in his life. It's almost easy for him to believe that any man in America can make himself rich or wealthy or comfortable, because the man in America who did that is not anybody that he knew in his lifetime. It wasn't his father, it was his father's father, or his father's father's father, right? And he also was one of those people who was like, everything I have I deserve, because someone before me worked really hard and then I inherited it. So that's the American way. That's what my birthright as an American is. As we know, there's also contradictions in this type of conservatism. Like I mentioned with the tariffs before, they also hate big government, but they're using federal courts and federal judges as a way to stop pro-labor cases and pro-labor legislations from moving forward. It's a very similar thing to what's happening with abortion in the United States right now, using federal courts and federal judges to stop law from being accepted when y'all hate government. Shouldn't be able to have it both ways, but they can have it both ways because they're the ones who are in power. The main issue with Robert Taft and the conservatives of the 1950s and 40s was that they were highly uncharismatic. They were not interesting people. And we're at the advent of television, the popularization of radio. And when the main thought leaders of your movement are not people who are easy to look at or listen to, it's hard to get that message out to the people. What the American Liberty meeting, they were handing out pamphlets, they were knocking on doors, they were talking to people person to person. You have a lot of people doing day-to-day work to spread those ideas. But when you move to like a few thought leaders, and those thought leaders are not incredibly interesting people, it's kind of harder for those ideas to proliferate the way that you want them to. Main pillars of modern conservatism, at least as Robert Taft believed in it, was fealty to property preserving original intent of the Constitution, contempt for social experiments and intellectual elites, a man who went to Yale has contempt for intellectual elites, but I will digress, and reverence for the Anglo-Saxon race. You can see Eisenhower kind of as like one of the people that I mentioned earlier, the people who are willing to adopt some of these Democrat policies, some of the bigger government stuff, if it's popular with the people, if it gets them in power, if it gets them elected. And then when they're elected and when they're in power, they can negotiate what they want to negotiate, how they want to negotiate it, but they don't have as much of a problem as the Robert Tafts of the world with accepting that sometimes Democratic policies are okay. That is popular with Eisenhower because Eisenhower was a war hero. He was a very popular figure in the American world at this time. And so him kind of like capitulating to some Democratic ideas was acceptable. But other Republicans who are lesser known doing the same thing wasn't amongst their base. When you get into the 1960s, the liberal consensus in the United States has reigned for, at this point, nearly 30 years. So nearly 3 decades since conservative ideas and conservative talking points have been popular in the mainstream, and people are starting to get agitated. This is when you start to see grassroots movements springing up. Something that I want to emphasize here is the patience. They're patient. I had to take a break to eat, and in that time, I managed to break the on switch for my light. So if the lighting is a little dark or messed up, it's because I had to jerry-rig a daylight lamp. Now, conservatives were not necessarily automatically opposed to some of these reforms, but all of them felt like moving too fast. Like, maybe it's time for the blacks to have their equality. They've been subjugated for too long, but you're telling me I need to give equality to blacks, women, gays, leftists, communists, all at the same time? It's just too much. What we get from that is a very reactionary, in the sense that it was a reaction, rising up. I don't know what the word is, but like a self-instigated movement of people from the grassroots trying to institutionalize conservatism in that they wanted to have their power back. They were tired of the liberal consensus. They were tired of too much welfare, too much big government, all of the things that I said they were opposed to at the beginning. So you have things like the John Birch Society, which is going around creating chapters and is supposed to be a secret society, but is not secret at all, to the point that like they're buying billboards talking about how the John Birch Society opposes the Marshall Supreme Court, which was seen as this like overly progressive Supreme Court, mainly because it enacted things like school segregation, the rights of the accused, as opposed to what we get in the 1980s, which again, reactionary. We get the victims' rights movement, just like these very progressive policies that the conservatives were not very much fans of. And so the John Birch Society, again, is allegedly secret, decentralized group of deeply conservative people who are meeting up, having meetings, paying dues, and spending time together to organize and proliferate conservative ideology, but also conservative beliefs. You know, these people who are so opposed to the concept of collectivism are using collectivism as a means of furthering their political agendas. Similarly, one of the case studies that we discussed in my history of conservatism class was Southern California, particularly Orange County, California. People see California as this liberal stronghold. The woke left is running Southern California. But Orange County is also in Southern California. Orange County is and has for at least the last 50, 60 years been full of hard right-wing conservatives. Even as these people are working for the government and receiving their money from these government jobs that they have. So, you know, they're a part of the federal bureaucracy that they are nominally opposed to. It's okay because they work in the defense industry, right? Even as their planned communities are being aided by government spending, suburban subsidies, roads, programs that create the possibility and the easy access to Orange County. These people in Orange County are very much opposed to what they see as liberal overreach or liberal over activation in the United States. The thing that I want to point out as important and continuous for conservatives in the United States is that they're able to hold these two opposing ideas in their minds very easily. They hate big government, they hate government overreach, they hate communism, they hate collectivism, but they benefit from big government spending. They benefit from collectivism, using it to proliferate their ideas. And communism is not really the threat at this time in the 50s and 60s that they purport it to be. But this is a time when communist could mean anyone. Communist could mean black people who want freedom. Communist could mean women who want liberation. Communist could mean Asian people who have recently immigrated from China. Communist can mean anything. Communist is just the opposite of American. And the other thing that's successful about these people is that they are quite fractured. They don't agree on all of the same points. They don't view conservatism in the same way, but they are still incredibly successful in organizing for their candidate at the time, Barry Goldwater. They were incredibly excited and motivated by the idea of Goldwater being the standard bearer of this idea of America as an inherently white Christian nation. Now, why you would hang your hat on the Jewish man to do that, I have absolutely no idea. But once again, holding contradicting ideas at the same time very dexterously. It doesn't matter that he's Jewish. It matters that he is the cowboy conservative that they have been waiting their entire lives for. And these people vehemently defend him. They go to the polls in the hundreds of thousands and vote for him. And none of that prevents the fact that he lost in the biggest landslide victory for the Democratic candidate in American history. But did the conservative coalition fall apart at this time? No. Did they believe that their ideas were a failure at this time because they had been unsuccessful in electing a candidate since Eisenhower in 1952? No. They push forward and continue to organize behind the scenes. Moving through the 60s, we start to get figures like William F. Buckley, who started both the television series Firing Line and the magazine, The National Review, as ways of putting the conservative idea once again in front of the people. So let's follow the line here. In the 30s, the conservatives start losing ground because their ideas are not as popular as they used to be. They stop being able to identify them except in opposition to the ideas of the Democrats and the liberals. All they know is that they don't want what the Democrats and the liberals are bringing to the country. So in the 40s, in the 30s and 40s, they're trying to appease hedging by capitulating, by saying, okay, we'll incorporate this democratic idea, or we'll incorporate this democratic idea, we'll run on this platform. And none of that is working because the people don't care about moderation. Moderation does not sell easily. The conservatives in the United States spend until the 1970s, so about 40 years floundering, failing. And when they finally start to gain ground and gain traction is once they have built a identity, a political platform, and a moral grounding that they then can consistently and easily put in front of the American people through mass media. People, not everybody watching Firing Line was a hardline conservative, but there was something appealing to hardline conservatives. And hearing the message over and over again, I'm sure, was likely to impact and influence some people who were undecided or who hadn't quite known what they were thinking yet. Prevalent throughout the United States. The conservatives have an identity of their own. But it is not the capitulation, it is not the moderation, it is not the centrism that they were trying to work with in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, because that failed them consistently. Electorally, consistently, they failed with centrism. They went with a certain brand of extremism. I mean, today you would not call Barry Goldwater an extremist. In fact, I think today, compared to Republicans of today, Barry Goldwater would probably be seen as a moderate. Goldwater is saying things to people like extremism in the pursuit of liberty is not wrong. It is still virtuous. And at that time, that idea doesn't sell because extremism is tied to fascism. It's tied to Nazism. It's tied to communism. And these are all factions that were and are enemies of the American people as recently as 20 years ago. The Italian fascists were extreme. The Japanese fascists were extreme. The German Nazis were extreme. Americans are not extreme. They define themselves as the opposite of that. Now we are closer to 100 years away from World War II than we were at that point. Our memories and our attention spans are shortened. If somebody today said extremism in pursuit of liberty is not wrong. I mean, we have people like Allie Beth Stuckey saying stuff like that every week on her fucking podcast. But in 1964, when Barry Goldwater is saying this, it's actually very unpopular. But he's laying groundwork. He's moving the party further right, whether consciously or unconsciously. And even though his campaign is wildly unsuccessful, over time, his ideas no longer are. So over the course of their 40 years of failure, until the Nixon, Carter, Reagan period of succession, the Republicans were not somewhere in bunkers, like hiding away and licking their wounds. They believed that their ideas were correct. They believed that their methodology was correct. They believed that their vision of America was correct, that America was and is an inherently Christian nation, that it should be governed by Christian people. They dropped the white supremacist parts of the message as they started to become less and less popular in the mainstream, that it should be governed by Christian people, and that the ideals of the Democratic Party, of collectivism, of taking care of one's neighbor as you would yourself, the government being used as a method of charity, all of those things, anything that Roosevelt stood for, was not only wrong, but dangerous to the American people. And so they spent years behind the scenes creating groups like the American Liberty League, developing thinkers like Robert Taft, creating magazines like the National Review, and television programs like Firing Line, and politicians like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, because they wanted to take America back. They wanted to, as our former and soon-to-be current president says, make America great again. And they did the work behind the scenes in order to do that. If we look at the history of American conservatism in the 20th century, it is not a history of failure. It is a history of persistence. And this is not for you to mistake me as, I don't know, Christina Conservative, like the girly pop who is out here advocating. I believe that these ideas are abhorrent. I hate them. I think they are evil. I think that they are leading us down a track that will eventually destroy the earth and the human race. And that might sound extreme, but it is. We're living in extreme times now. I point this out and I bring this to us because we can be sad, we can despair, we can wallow, we can be disappointed that it didn't work, that we failed, that we lost. And when I say we, I mean like the left, liberals in the United States and the world over. We can feel whatever we want to feel, but what's most important and what's most useful to us is getting up, standing up, fighting, working, writing, thinking. If we say we know what's in the best interests of the American people, we need to make an effort to get those ideas out there. We take for granted too often that people are liberal. We take for granted too often that the idea that taking care of your neighbor, or making sure that people can afford to eat or have housing or have health care or whatever is popular. It isn't necessarily. And it's not necessarily that these ideas are unpopular. It's just that the people who disagree with them have other ideas that are incredibly popular. We need to find a way to get the message out there. We need to find a way to get off our asses, stop complaining on Twitter, and start talking to people in real life. Or if we're going to complain on Twitter, if we're going to complain on the internet at all, make it so that it's in a forum like this, you might say, where people can see it and react to it and respond to it and disagree with it. I think it was the Reverend Martin Luther King who said that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And maybe it does, but it doesn't do it on its own. It does it because there are human beings behind bending it. And we've let go of that responsibility for entirely too long. Part of the problem in the 1960s and 70s was that people, liberals, took for granted the idea that liberalism would just roll on inevitably forever to its natural conclusion. And it will not, and it cannot, because there were people working behind the scenes to make sure that it never did. And now it is our time to work behind the scenes to make sure that it does. In the time that we have left, we have the responsibility to create the world that we want to live in. It does not just start to exist. What can we as liberals, leftists, whatever, however you identify, learn from the history of conservatism? Why am I even talking about this? Why is this my response to the election? Because I was sitting in class and thinking about how much is similar between the Democratic Party today and the Republican Party in the 1930s and 1940s, and watching and reading and learning about how the Republicans failed over and over again to engage their base or add people to it by trying to straddle the middle. The way that the Republican Party regained its base, the way that conservatism regained popularity in the United States, was by going farther right. It's sometimes going to the extreme right. And along the way, they picked up people who, though they did not agree with the most right-word factions of the party, did agree with the clear message that they had about the country and the vision that they saw for the country. It was clear, it was well communicated, and, I did not do my eyebrows. It was clear, it was well communicated, and most importantly, we know that it was successful because we see the America that we live in today. The America that we live in today was built by conservative thinkers in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. It was rejoiced upon and brought forth into the world in the 1980s. And even as we have lived through Democratic presidencies, through Clinton, through Obama, through Biden, we have been living in the conservative world that was created in the mid-20th century. The headline story was civil rights, was counterculture, was women's rights and women's liberation. And the underground story was the reactionary political world that we are currently embroiled in. We will never be free if we continue to try and attract those who are straddling the middle. They're not straddling because they don't know which side they want to go on. They're not straddling because they're waiting for the more persuasive argument. They're straddling because really the personal is not political to them. Kamala Harris lost Michigan by 82,000 votes. She lost Wisconsin by less than 1 million. These are people who might have voted for her if she stood for something, if her message was clear, if she had something to articulate that was not just not them. The Republican Party did not them for 40 years and it failed them. And when they started going more to the right, that's when they started to see success. So if you take anything from this, that's when they started to see success. And furthermore, the base of Republican voters are people who are okay voting with people who might only have a single issue in alignment with them, who might only have the vision of the country in alignment with them. There are plenty of people who voted for Trump and Vance who don't agree with Project 2025, who don't think that the Department of Education should be abolished, who need welfare to live, who are alive right now because of COVID-19 vaccines and mumps vaccines and measles and rubella. And those people still voted with them because they agree that abortion is wrong, or because they want a tax break, or because they got a $1,200 check 4 years ago. They live with the double think, the double consciousness, the uncertainty, and they're okay with that. They live with the moral grayness and the impurity of execution of the Republican message and of the right message, and they accept it because they think as long as the world is going more towards that, it's better. And it's not. We know it's not. If you're watching this still, you know it's not. And so I say to you, go outside, touch some grass, and call your friends. If you write, start writing. If you draw, start drawing. Whatever it is that you do it in the best way that you can to support the building of maybe not necessarily democratic, but at least left coalition in the United States. The left has been floundering in this country since the 80s. They'll tell you it's been since Obama left office, but it's been for the past 40 years. And the only way that we can take back the country, the only way that we can live really honestly live on the earth, because Trump is trying to roll back environmental protections, is if we stop crying and get to work. That's what the Republicans did in the 1950s, and look where they are. That's all I want to say. I'm coming at you not with a message of sadness or even defeat, but with an urging for us to get to work. I'm in the UK, I'm at school, and I'm a historian, and I'm going to be teaching people about history. And the more people know about their past, maybe the better that we can do in the future. I don't know when I'm coming back to the United States at this point, at least not to live. Maybe I'll be James Baldwin. I'm not trying to say that I'm as good at writing as he is. I'm not trying to say any of that, but like a thought leader in exile, creating the America that I want to live in from a place where I know that I can live. Thank you so much for watching this. If you have, please give this video a thumbs up. It tells the algorithm that you like my stuff, and it pushes my videos out so that I can find other people who might be interested in it. And please consider subscribing to my channel. I am here, honestly, at this point, talking about history, pop culture, movies, TV shows, books, literally anything I want to talk about. And if you're American and you're scared and you're sad, I'm going to put some resources in the description down below that can help you with bad thoughts that you might be having, or catastrophic thinking that you might be experiencing. And also some mutual aid organizations, ways that you can get involved in your community to start proliferating and really honestly creating the type of Democratic Party or left party that we want in the US. That's all I have to say. A luta continua. Bye.